Hey, everyone, welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Hmm.
We're going to be tackling regenerative agriculture today, specifically the socioeconomic impact of it.
Okay.
We've been digging into regenerative agriculture, like what it is and all that stuff and how it's different from conventional farming.
Yeah.
But now we're really going beyond the field, how this impacts our communities and economies,
Right.
even policy.
Yeah, for sure.
And we're focusing today on chapters 4.1 to 4.3 of your source material,
Okay.
Introduction to Regenerative Agriculture.
Mm.
And I've got some really interesting things underlined here that we're
I'm
going to...
excited to hear about those.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've been finding really interesting is this idea that it's not just like an isolated thing that happens on a farm. It's like,
Right.
it's about systems,
Yeah.
like interconnected systems.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit.
Okay.
Starting with chapter 4.1, which is Community and Farmer Engagement. And I think this is interesting because if I'm a farmer and I'm trying these new techniques, why do I need the whole village on board?
Well, I think it's kind of like, imagine you're a farmer and you're trying to switch to cover cropping.
Okay.
It requires sourcing new seeds. Maybe you need to learn new equipment.
Right.
And it definitely takes a leap of faith because you're not tilling the soil like everyone else is doing around you. And
It's risky.
it is risky, yeah. And so having a community of other farmers who've tried it, or even just local businesses that are willing to source your cover crops,
Right.
makes it way less scary.
Yeah. So it's not about hand-holding. It's about support.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not just for the farmer's benefit either.
Right.
The source material highlights how empowering this can be for marginalized communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And they talk about the Oshadi Collective in India.
Okay.
They're not just growing regenerative cotton. They've built a whole supply chain complete with soil testing labs and everything
Yeah.
that empowers women and gives better livelihoods for everyone involved.
That's incredible.
It is.
So you're saying like this idea that eco-friendly has to be a sacrifice,
Yeah.
not necessarily the case.
Right.
So speaking of challenges, though, let's move on to chapter 4.2, economic viability.
Okay.
Can this actually be profitable, or is it all just good intentions?
Yeah, that is, I think, the million-dollar question. And there's no easy answer, but there's definitely growing evidence that regenerative farms can not only survive, but really thrive.
Okay.
And chapter 4.2 talks about how these regenerative practices can actually save farmers money in the long run.
Really, I always just assumed that like the organic fertilizers and natural pest control would be more expensive.
Yeah, it seems intuitive, but you have to think about it. If you're constantly having to buy synthetic fertilizers because your soil is just depleted,
Okay.
that's an ongoing cost.
Yeah.
Regenerative practices focus on building up that healthy soil that's going to hold nutrients naturally, so you're investing in the long-term health of your land, and that can actually save you money on those inputs.
So you're saying it's like preventative health care, but for your farm.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Yeah.
But let's be real. Even if you are saving money on inputs, can you still make a decent living?
Right.
I mean, are people willing to pay extra for regenerative products?
That's where consumer demand comes in.
Okay.
And thankfully, that demand is growing.
Okay.
There's just more awareness about the connection between our food choices and the impact they have on the environment.
For sure.
So people are seeking out food that not only tastes good and it's nutritious,
Right.
but it's also produced in a way that like aligns with their values.
Yeah.
And they are willing to pay a little bit more for it.
Okay. So there is a market,
There is.
but there's got to be a catch, right? Can't all be sunshine and roses.
Yeah, you're right. There are definitely challenges. And chapter 4.2 talks about that too.
Okay.
One of the biggest hurdles is that upfront cost of transitioning to these practices. You might need to buy new equipment, maybe experiment with some different practices, and you might even see a dip in your yields
Oh, no.
during that transition period. And that can be really tough for farmers that are already working with those tight margins.
So you're saying the economic viability of this is a bit of a mixed bag.
It is, yeah.
There's potential there, but there are challenges.
There are.
Okay. So that brings us to policy then,
Right.
because Chapter 4.3 of our source material talks about how policy and regulations can make or break the success of this.
Absolutely.
So if we want to see this movement really take root, we need supportive policies to help these farmers make that transition
Definitely.
and reward them for their efforts.
Absolutely. And if I were a policymaker, I think the first thing I would do is create some financial incentives.
Okay.
Subsidies, tax breaks, even direct payments for adopting these regenerative practices
Right.
that can help offset those initial costs and make it a much more appealing option for farmers.
That makes a lot of sense.
And I think it's also important to invest in research. Okay.
We need to constantly be learning and improving and understanding how these regenerative practices work in different regions for different crops,
Yeah.
and then making sure that knowledge is accessible to farmers through training programs and resources.
Well, it's about education too.
Absolutely.
But how do we even know if something is regenerative?
Right. We need some standards.
Yes, some definitions.
Exactly.
Okay.
Chapter 4.3 talks about that. We need clear definitions, measurable benchmarks.
Right.
So the EU's soil monitoring law
Okay.
and what they call good agricultural and environmental conditions.
Okay.
They actually provide a great example of how regulations can support this.
Yeah.
By setting those clear standards and making sure there's consistency.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's like any other industry.
Exactly.
You need guidelines, you need regulations.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, we've covered so much in this first part.
I know, it's a lot.
We've talked about community engagement, the economic viability of this, the policy, the regulation. It's a fascinating field.
It is. It really is. And there's so much potential here.
So much.
But before we move on to part 2, I want to leave you with a question.
Okay.
If regenerative agriculture has all these benefits for the environment, for society, for the economy,
Right.
what's holding us back?
That's a good question.
Yeah, we're going to delve deeper into that in the next part of our deep dive, so stay tuned.
Sounds good. So welcome back to the deep dive. It's been really engaging so far.
It has.
We've been talking about these policies and regulations.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to see how that translates into real action. Like
Right.
what's coming up in the next chapters for us.
Yeah, you're right. It's all well and good to talk about these supportive policies, but I'm ready to see how they're actually shaping,
Yeah,
what regenerative agriculture looks like globally.
for sure.
And chapters 5 and 6 of Introduction to Regenerative Agriculture promise to shed some light on exactly that.
Perfect. So
That-
chapter 5,
Yeah.
it really dives into how regenerative agriculture links to those broader sustainability goals. And subchapter 5.1 tackles the elephant in the room,
Yeah.
climate change.
Right.
We've been talking about carbon sequestration. How does that play into the bigger picture of mitigating climate change?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's easy to get caught up in the specifics,
Yeah.
like cover crops and composting.
Mm.
But I want to understand the impact on a global scale.
Yeah.
Like, does this actually have the power to move the needle on climate change?
Well, that's what's so exciting about regenerative agriculture is that it's not just a feel-good solution.
Yeah.
It's actually backed by science.
Okay.
And subchapter 5.1 explains how regenerative practices can significantly contribute to pulling that carbon out of the atmosphere and storing it in the soil.
Okay.
So essentially, we're turning farms into these massive carbon sinks.
So it all comes back around.
Yes, it does.
Like healthy soil, less reliance on those fertilizers.
Yeah.
And then ultimately a reduction in greenhouse gases.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm seeing the domino effect here.
Yeah.
And chapter 5 goes beyond just carbon sequestration, right? It looks at food security,
Yes,
which is huge.
it is.
This idea of growing more food on less land.
You're right.
And at the same time improving the nutritional value of the food.
Yeah.
Sounds a little too good to be true.
It does, but subchapter 5.2 really unpacks how this works.
Right.
Regenerative agriculture builds this resilience
Yep.
into our food systems.
Okay.
So by improving soil health and promoting biodiversity, farms become way less susceptible to things like pests and diseases,
Okay.
and even those unpredictable weather patterns that we're seeing more and more.
So it's like creating a safety net for our food supply.
Exactly.
Okay. And that's crucial, with a growing global population.
It is, and it's not just about quantity.
Right.
Subchapter 5.2 highlights how healthier soil leads to more nutrient-dense crops.
Okay. So it's a win-win.
It is.
Healthier planet, healthier people.
Exactly.
But what about the future?
Oh, yeah, good question.
Is this just a trend or is it here to stay?
Right.
Chapter 5 talks about future directions, right?
It does.
Innovation.
Yes, subchapter 5.3.
Okay, give me a sneak peek.
Okay, so there's a lot of buzz around microbial technology.
Okay.
Scientists are really getting into this world of soil microbes
Okay.
and figuring out how we can harness their power to make soil healthier and more productive.
It's like unlocking a hidden superpower.
It is.
Okay, I love it. What else?
Precision agriculture is a big one.
Okay.
So they're combining data analytics with all this advanced technology,
Okay.
sensors, drones.
Wow.
And it lets farmers make really precise decisions about things like irrigation, fertilizing, and pest control so you minimize waste and maximize efficiency.
So it's not about technology replacing nature.
Like-
It's about working with it.
Exactly.
Okay, I love
Yeah.
it.
And then Chapter 6 takes us on this global tour.
Oh, cool.
It shows us success stories and case studies from all around the world.
Okay, let's go on that journey.
Yeah.
I want to see how this is applied in different contexts.
Okay, well, subchapter 6.1 really paints a picture of this global movement. From the American Midwest to the plains of Africa,
Wow.
we see how regenerative agriculture is taking root.
So are there any common threads?
There are. Yeah, one thing that really stands out is that emphasis on community engagement and collaboration.
Okay.
So whether it's farmers sharing knowledge with each other or partnering with researchers and policymakers,
Right.
it really depends on collective action.
I like that we can achieve more together,
Exactly.
but I'm sure there are unique challenges and opportunities depending on where you are.
Oh, for sure. And subchapter 6.2 explores how those regenerative principles are adapted to different climate zones.
Okay.
So, from the tropics to the Arctic.
So it's not one size fits all.
No, it's a set of guiding principles
Yep.
that can be tailored to the specific needs of each environment.
That's really cool.
Yeah. And I think we can learn a lot from, both the successes and the failures of these different initiatives.
Yeah, for sure.
And subchapter 6.3 really digs into those lessons learned and best practices from these global experiences.
Perfect. A roadmap.
It is.
Okay, so in this part 2, we've covered, the global impact on climate change, food security.
Yeah.
We've even touched on the future a bit.
Yeah, those innovations.
Yeah, and it's clear that this movement is gaining momentum.
It is.
I'm ready for more, though. I want to get into the practical aspects,
Okay.
the tools and techniques that farmers are using.
You got it. Chapters 7 and 8. That's what they're all about.
Perfect.
We're going to explore the nuts and bolts,
Okay.
the real-world applications, and the future outlook of regenerative agriculture.
Stay tuned for part 3. Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive. I'm so excited to wrap this up. We've talked big picture, community economics, global impact, all that stuff.
Right.
But I want to get down to the nitty-gritty. What does this actually look like for the farmer on the ground?
Yeah, I think that's where chapter 7 and 8 of your source material really shine.
Okay.
They move from the why to the how.
Okay, perfect.
So yeah, subchapter 7.1 is like the farmer's handbook.
Okay, I like that.
It's packed with all these specific techniques and strategies.
So we've talked about things like cover cropping and no-till farming.
Right.
But how do these things all fit together?
Yeah.
What does a regenerative farm look like?
Okay, so imagine you're walking onto a regenerative farm, right?
Right.
Instead of seeing that bare soil between rows of crops, you see this vibrant tapestry of cover crops.
Oh, wow.
They're enriching the soil, preventing erosion, and the farmer might be using a no-till drill to plant seeds directly into the residue from the previous crop.
Okay, so you're saying minimal disturbance.
Exactly.
Okay, so they're really working with nature here.
Yeah, it's about creating that environment where those natural processes can just thrive.
But with so many different techniques, how does a farmer even know where to start?
That's a great question.
And how do they know if they're doing it right?
Right. Well, that's where those monitoring and evaluation strategies come in that we see in subchapter 7.2.
Okay.
Regenerative agriculture. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It requires a lot of observation, collecting data, and being willing to adapt.
So you're like a scientist.
You are a scientist in your own field.
Yeah, I like that.
So what kind of tools are they using to do all this?
Yeah, are there specific tools or technologies?
Yeah, there's a ton of innovative tools out there.
Yeah.
From simple soil tests to really sophisticated sensors that monitor moisture levels,
Wow.
nutrient content, even microbial activity.
Wow.
There are drones with cameras that can give you an aerial view of the whole farm,
Okay.
so you can see areas that need attention.
Oh, that's so cool.
And then there's software that can help analyze all that data.
So it's about taking all this information and turning it into something useful.
Exactly, into decisions.
Yeah. Okay. I love how technology is helping us
Yeah.
do this in a more precise and, thoughtful way.
And then chapter 8 brings us to the grand finale,
Okay.
the conclusion and future outlook of regenerative agriculture.
The big finish.
Subchapter 8.1 just sums up all those key takeaways, reminding us of the impact this can have
Yeah.
on the planet, our communities.
But we've talked about challenges, right?
Right. Are there any obstacles to this becoming more widespread?
Yeah. Does the source material address that?
It does, yes. Subchapter 8.2 acknowledges those barriers.
Okay.
Systemic economic constraints, even cultural resistance sometimes.
So it's not going to be easy.
It's not, but subchapter 8.3 ends on a hopeful note.
Okay.
It emphasizes that the future of this really rests in our hands.
Okay.
It's a call to action for all of us, farmers, consumers, policymakers, researchers,
Yeah.
to work together and make this happen.
We've got work to do.
We do.
This deep dive has been so eye-opening. What's the most significant takeaway for you?
Honestly, it's realizing that regenerative agriculture, it's not just about farming, it's about like shifting our whole relationship with nature.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's understanding that we're all connected
Yes.
and that our actions have these ripple effects.
It's a powerful reminder that the choices we make about our food, our farming practices have consequences.
Big consequences.
So we all have a role to play in creating a more sustainable and equitable future.
We do.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
It really has. And to all of our listeners out there,
Yes.
we encourage you to keep exploring this topic.
Absolutely.
Find regenerative farms products in your communities. Support policies that promote this kind of agriculture. And most importantly, stay curious.
Keep learning.
Until next time, keep diving deep.